Welcome to this session of the Cloud Exchange. My guest is Steve Boberski, the Chief Technology Officer for Public Sector at Genesys. Steve, always a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start at the beginning. We're talking cloud. Of course, it's Cloud Exchange. So what some of those trends you're starting to see around agencies move to the cloud? There's typical challenges, but is there anything new that's emerged, anything that's kind of different than previous challenges?
Well, you know, for a long time, everybody was talking about why cloud. I think why cloud is done. It's how cloud is the challenge. I think there's a little bit of a delay on what to move to the cloud and when. Some of the prioritization has become a challenge, I think, with the legacy systems. I think some of the trends we're still seeing that we'd like to hopefully folks move away from is there's still this desire to lift and shift their entire infrastructure from what they have into the cloud, and that's really not necessarily practical, but also not necessarily necessary, right? Some of the technology they have today, the way they're doing things, they only do it that way because it's the only way the technology allowed to do. So we're kind of encouraging the business view. Look at the business functions, then get the functional requirements, then get the technical requirements, right? Business requirements first, and that's probably the thing it's a slow shift, but that's happening. And then AI is slowing a lot of folks down.
I don't want to go into AI too much.
Right.
There's a whole AI discussion.
That's right.
Every conference. But I think around the cloud, what's interesting to me is the lift and shift piece. You think by now a lot of agencies would have been done with that, right? That was the low-hanging fruit. That was the easy things. But you seem to say, is there still, you get, as you discuss with your federal clients, hey, Steve, what if we just put this in the cloud? Wouldn't that work?
Well, yeah, and you know, it varies by every agency is in a different part of their transformation journey. Of course, digital transformation is done to death as a topic, but it's not done as far as a task goes. So there are multiple challenges. Some of them are some of the legacy technologies just don't lend themselves to being replaced directly with a cloud solution today. Some of them, it's a personnel issue, right? Or it's a knowledge management challenge, whereas they don't know how to take advantage all the data they've accumulated with a legacy application. They're not quite sure how they would be able to continue to access it or apply it towards the new application that they may be evaluating today. Budget's still a challenge, never goes away, and we're seeing a little bit of a pause button, I think, and there's an opportunity for discovery. But it's sort of it's not quite deer in the headlights, but it's definitely we think we've moved as much as we can. With what's left, what do we do now? Yeah. And that's where we're at, I think.
Let's talk a little bit about that. What's left, what do we do now, and the business driving the requirements. I think a lot of times when I talk to CIOs, they talk a lot about, well, we got to meet with the business, and the push towards DevSecOps has helped that.
Right.
The human-centered agile design. What are some of those things about the business side that they should keep in mind? What are some of those best practices that you've seen work?
Well, I mean, you know, one of the things is that whole stakeholder concept, right? Which is when you're moving to the cloud, and it's such a large infrastructure component, but certainly in our industry, customer experience, you're talking about a large number of employees that are dedicated to facing the public and should have a real significant stake in what's going to happen with the technology they use. And sometimes they don't necessarily have the representation they need. So it's really important to have a large group of stakeholders across the board when you're doing these things. Like every agency, things are siloed. But when it comes to migrating to the cloud, they're competing for resources and budget. That's always a challenge. And you know, if they could focus a little on the ROI from a best practice perspective, they'll find that some are moving to the cloud. Not always, but many times, if you can select the right application or the right order to move something to the cloud, you'll end up releasing funds or identifying savings that can help pay for the rest of the journey. And that's really important. Not always the case, but many times is. The other thing we find is that, and what we try to encourage as much as possible, is that discovery side, analytics. In the customer experience realm, of course, it's journey analytics and journey mapping, but it doesn't matter what technology you're applying it to. It is, where are you now exactly? And if you don't know exactly where you are, across the board, not just with a specific app, there's no way to tell where you're going, right? In our industry, it's particularly useful, but across the board, just discovery, everybody's hit that pause button to reevaluate, but I think having that plan, starting with the business functions, is the key.
I love that. If you don't know where you are, how do you know where you're going? It's a common refrain in any sector, whether you're in transportation or technology or wherever it is. You got to know.
It's true, and you know, we're the customer experience company, right? So contact center as a service, analytics, AI, certainly important components. But to make a change, let's say from a legacy premises system to a cloud system, try to capture all of that data across what might be multiple channels or multiple components and determining where to make a change is really not as easy as you think. And so the default habit is let's replicate what we have. And that's okay, but you may be shorting yourself on some of the capabilities of the technology. You also may be spending money on technology you don't need to do that with. So the analytics portion allows you to come in and take a snapshot across the board of maybe, let's say in our industry, the entire journey of a customer and how they might be coming through, and then say, okay, AIs may not be this panacea, but I do have an opportunity to maybe do some self-service here or improve it. Or we released a bot over here and it's not doing what we expected it to do. Or holy cow, I've identified 10 minutes of call silence on every inbound call. A toll-free service is still only free for the caller, right? So you start adding it up to hundreds of thousands of minutes, that's real dollar savings. When you start doing that kind of analysis, then you start having opportunities to save.
You mentioned customer experience, huge push across government. We know the executive order. We know that there's a 21st Century Idea Act guidance coming from the Office of Management Budget later this summer. We even know, for instance, that certain agencies have moved to chatbots to really deal with those challenges. So let's talk about that experience piece, the experience as a service. Talk a little bit about what that is, how the cloud plays into that, and how can agencies really take advantage of it?
Sure. So, Genesys, we are a customer experience company, and we've talked before about introducing empathy into the equation. So, we view the entire journey of the customer and the employee together, right? There's an industry catchphrase now, an expression which is total experience is equivalent to customer experience and employee experience, right? We focus on both sides of that journey equally. It's incredibly important. When you see things like knowledge management, when you talk about the aging of the workforce today and some of the challenges that goes with, along with technology enabling on the front end, it's an entire journey to view. When we talk about introducing empathy, we talk about arming the agent with additional knowledge of a customer journey. If I know you've been to a website and tried to execute a transaction multiple times and decided not to or had trouble, and I feel like, and the next thing you did is call. I see that you may have called 3 or 4 times, but maybe have not waited in queue. It took too long. You didn't get the answer you wanted. If I have that entire journey in front of me, I can, next time you call and answer the call, say, hey, Jason, I see you were at our website and you've tried to do X, Y, and Z. Now I'm empathetic with what you're doing. You are happy because you don't have to say, well, I just tried that for the last hour. I don't have to play inquisitor. And then all those other metrics that you're chasing, call handling time, average handling time, customer satisfaction, everything you want to measure in a contact center, we believe takes care of itself if you focus on the empathy side of the equation. And technology is an important piece of that.
And are you starting to find that agencies, as they understand more about CX and how the role that CX plays, how are they starting to use some of those capabilities to lower those metrics? How long am I on hold for? Or how do I get answers to maybe the simple questions? Again, the chatbot is a perfect example.
Well, and again, varies from agency to agency, but what we see if they take the analytics journey that we encourage them to go on, right, to talk about how to focus their resources, we do something called identity stitching, which is we can track a journey of a customer or group of customers from the beginning of their transaction all the way to the end. And everybody chatbots, right? It sounds a very common technology, right? Voice bots, interactive voice response, and intelligent call routing based on what you get. All these things are very important in industry, but how do you determine where you're at? We talk about reducing friction, right? Which is just where are you having a challenge in the journey? Where are they stopping, stumbling, or maybe moving away from? And then reducing that white space, which is the customer gets to this point and then they don't really have any place intuitive to go. Things like chatbots and artificial intelligence have multiple roles there. Certainly, on a web page, you want to do some things like reduce your bounce rate on the page. You want to make sure that people don't stay too long or they stay long enough and execute transactions. But also, you want to enable the rest of the journey. So we start doing real-time sentiment analysis of the voice of a caller. We do predictive routing. This is part of predictive engagement, which means based on the analytics of the call, what you've done before, plus some of the choices you've made or what you're saying, we will route you more expeditiously to a more appropriate resource, right? Maybe something that's more geared to take your call. You might get a resolution significantly faster because based on where you've been and doing the analytics of the data that are available to us, we can then make sure you go where you need to go the first time. All that stuff starts to shrink.
And the cloud's enabling all of this because when you have the power, the compute power, the storage power, all that enables better service. And Steve, we're just about out of time for this session, but I want to make sure you get the last word. And as each agency goes down their journey, cloud, customer experience, let's marry the two together. What's the one or two pieces of advice you'd give them? I think you offered that earlier, know where you are so you know where you're going.
Well, whenever you're evaluating a new technology such as AI, we really encourage a crawl, walk, run approach. I was doing a panel not so long ago, and I was on with a gentleman from OPM. I'm not going to use his name, I didn't get permission, but he used a term called catastrophic success. And this is what you want to protect against the most. Everybody views this new technology as just that. It can fix everything. If you have a measured approach, you take a small, limited scope, you would clearly identify what you intend to do, and then have measurable criteria at the other end of that. You can determine whether it's a success or not, right? If it's wildly successful, but you don't have a plan to introduce it, everybody's going to get a hold of it, and then it takes over, and then you lose control of that technology, and it becomes its own entity, and it's a problem just from a funding source, let alone everything else, right? So that crawl, walk, run approach we think is very important, and always, no matter what you're doing, measurable criteria. Make sure that you have a way to measure whether or not you're successful in anything you're trying to do that's new.
All right. Great advice, Steve. I really appreciate your time, but unfortunately we are out of time. So let me thank my guest. Steve Boberski is the Chief Technology Officer for Public Sector at Genesys. Steve, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Cloud Exchange.